Chapter 4. The Keeper of the Keys. His 11th birthday was only minutes away. Not that anyone would remember, but Harry had never forgotten. He quietly counted down the seconds, his mind wandering back to the letters. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were meant for him, and that something important, something life-changing, was written inside. But what could it possibly be? Just as the clock struck midnight, there was a loud, booming knock on the door, echoing through the tiny hut. Harry sat up in alarm, and even Uncle Vernon jolted awake, grabbing the rifle he had brought along. Boom. Another knock, louder this time, shook the entire hut. Someone or something was outside, trying to get in. The wind howled through the cracks in the walls, but the thunderous banging drowned it out. Uncle Vernon aimed the rifle shakily at the door. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice barely concealing his fear. There was no answer. Just another tremendous bang. Then, with a final crash, the door burst open, and an enormous figure stepped inside. Harry's eyes widened as he took in the sight of the towering man who now stood in the doorway. He was huge, too tall to be human, Harry thought. His wild, bushy hair and thick beard, making him look like a giant from a storybook. He had to duck as he entered the small room, and his coat was so large, it seemed to be made out of hundreds of patchwork pieces stitched together. The man shut the door behind him with a flick of his wrist, as if the wind and storm outside were no more than a passing nuisance. Then, he turned and looked around the room, his dark eyes resting on Harry. "Harry Potter," the giant rumbled in a voice that was surprisingly warm and friendly, despite his rough appearance. "Happy birthday." Harry blinked up at him, unable to speak. How did this enormous stranger know his name? Uncle Vernon, on the other hand, found his voice quickly. "I demand you leave at once." Vernon barked, though his voice was trembling. "You're breaking and entering." The man turned to face Vernon and, with a casual motion, reached out and bent the barrel of the rifle in half, as though it were made of rubber. Uncle Vernon gasped, dropping the useless weapon to the floor. The giant paid him no further attention. Instead, he stepped toward Harry with a wide grin. "Sorry about that. Name's Hagrid, Rubus Hagrid, keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts. And you must be Harry Potter. I've been sent to bring you to school." "School?" Harry repeated, feeling as though he had missed something important. "Aye," Hagrid said, rummaging around in his enormous coat before pulling out a slightly squashed cake. The words, "Happy Birthday, Harry," were written in green icing, though they had been a bit smudged. "Made it myself. Might be a bit smashed, but it'll taste all right." Harry took the cake, his mind racing with questions. Who was this man? And what was Hogwarts? Before he could ask, Hagrid pulled out a yellowed envelope, the same kind Harry had seen the Dursleys frantically try to keep away from him. "Here's your letter," Hagrid said, handing it to Harry. "About time you read it." With trembling hands, Harry opened the envelope and pulled out the letter inside. It was thick, written on parchment, and bore an official-looking seal. He read the words aloud, barely able to believe them. "Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Headmalbus Dumbledore. Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." Harry's voice trailed off. "Witchcraft and Wizardry?" He looked up at Hagrid, his confusion evident. "There must be a mistake," he said quietly. "I can't be a wizard. I'm just—" "Harry," Hagrid chuckled, sitting down on the creaky bed. "A wizard, o' course," he said, smiling warmly. "And a good one, I reckon, once you've been trained up a bit. Your parents were some of the finest witches and wizards of their time, too." Harry's heart skipped a beat at the mention of his parents. "My parents?" Hagrid's expression softened. "Aye, Lily and James Potter. You don't know?" He paused, then let out a sigh, his eyes darkening as he turned to the Dursleys. "They never told ye? Your parents didn't die in no car crash, Harry." "They were murdered by the darkest wizard of all time, Voldemort." Harry's stomach lurched at the name. It sent chills down his spine, though he didn't know why. Voldemort tried to kill you too, but for some reason he couldn't. Something about you stopped him. No one knows why. All we know is that you survived, and that's why people in our world know your name. They call you the boy who lived." The room fell silent. Harry could barely breathe. Famous? Murdered parents? A dark wizard? He had spent his life being treated like nothing, like he was a burden. How could any of this be real? Before Harry could fully process everything, Uncle Vernon's furious voice broke through the tension. "He's not going," Vernon shouted, his face turning purple with rage. "We swore when we took him in, we'd put an end to all that rubbish, magic and all. He's not going to that school." Hagrid's face darkened, and he slowly stood, towering over Vernon. "He'll be going to Hogwarts whether you like it or not," Hagrid growled. "And nothing you can do will stop it." Then Aunt Petunia, who had been silent all this time, finally spoke, her voice trembling with anger and fear. She launched into a rant about her sister, Harry's mother, calling her a freak and explaining how they had always known Harry would turn out just like her. Harry felt a knot tighten in his chest as he listened to her words. So that's why the Dursleys had always hated him. They had always known about his parents, about magic. They had resented him from the start. Hagrid turned to Harry with a gentle smile. "Don't pay them no mind, Harry. You're going to be just fine. You've got your parents' blood in ya, and you'll be a great wizard, I'm sure of it." Harry swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. He had never felt like he belonged anywhere until now. There was a world waiting for him, a world where he could finally be himself. Hagrid paused for a moment, watching Harry closely, his dark eyes full of sorrow and a deep, almost protective warmth. "You're famous, Harry?" he repeated gently, his voice soft but filled with weight, as if the words themselves carried an enormous burden. "Famous for what happened that night. Everyone in our world knows your name." Harry blinked, his mind reeling. Famous? He? Harry Potter? Famous? The boy who had spent his life being ignored, neglected, treated like a burden by the Dursleys? How could he possibly be famous? The very idea seemed absurd, and yet here was Hagrid, this massive, towering figure who had somehow found him on a remote island, telling him that he was known by everyone in a world Harry didn't even know existed until tonight. But why? Harry's voice was barely above a whisper. His throat was dry, his hands trembling slightly as he clutched the letter from Hogwarts. He could hardly process all the things Hagrid had told him. Magic, Hogwarts, his parents being wizards, murdered by a dark wizard named Voldemort. And now this? Famous? Hagrid gave him a long, steady look, his thick brows furrowing. He sat down heavily on the edge of the small, rickety bed, the frame creaking loudly under his enormous weight. He took a deep breath, as if preparing himself for a difficult explanation. "See, Harry, the night your parents died, well, Voldemort tried to kill you too. Dunno why, but something about you stopped him. No one knows how or why, but when he tried to curse you, the curse backfired. He couldn't kill you, and it destroyed him instead. Left you with that scar." Hagrid pointed again at Harry's forehead. "That's why people know your name. They call you the boy who lived." Harry's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to wrap his mind around Hagrid's words. It all sounded too fantastic, too unbelievable. He wasn't special. He had never been special. He had lived his entire life being treated like he was nothing. And now, suddenly, he was supposed to believe that he was famous in an entire world he had never even known existed? "I'm famous?" Harry repeated, his voice trembling. "But I didn't do anything. I don't even remember that night." "Doesn't matter," Hagrid said gruffly, though there was a note of kindness in his voice. "Your name's been known in the wizarding world ever since. But you've had a tough life, I reckon," he added, casting a dark glance at the Dursleys, who were huddled together in the corner, looking pale and terrified. "They never told you nothing about your parents, did they?" Harry shook his head, feeling a dull ache in his chest. "They told me my parents died in a car crash." Hagrid let out a furious growl, his face darkening again. "Lyin' Dursleys. What a load of codswallop. You've been lied to your whole life, Harry, but no more. You're a wizard, and a good one at that, once you've had some proper training, and you're going to Hogwarts. Harry felt as though a door had suddenly been opened, showing him a life he had never even imagined. He had spent years being told he was worthless, strange, a burden. And now, this enormous man was telling him that he belonged to a world of magic, that he had a place waiting for him at a school of witchcraft and wizardry. It was more than Harry could have ever dreamed of. But just as a flicker of excitement began to build in Harry's chest, Uncle Vernon interrupted with a snarl. "He's not going," he spat, his face twisted with fury. "We swore when we took him in, we'd put a stop to that rubbish, magic and all. He's not going to that school, and that's final." Hagrid's eyes flashed dangerously, and he slowly stood up, towering over Uncle Vernon. "You won't be stopping him," Hagrid growled, his voice low and threatening. "Harry Potter belongs at Hogwarts. It's his birthright." Aunt Petunia, who had been silent all this time, suddenly spoke up, her voice shrill and trembling. "You think we didn't know? You think we wanted to raise him, knowing what he was? My sister, my perfect freak sister, got herself blown up, and we were left to deal with the consequences. We knew he'd be just as abnormal as she was." Her words stung Harry like a slap to the face. He had always wondered why the Dursleys hated him so much, why Aunt Petunia had always looked at him with such disdain. Now, for the first time, he understood. It wasn't just because he was different, it was because of his mother. Because of the world of magic that Aunt Petunia had always resented. Hagrid's expression softened as he looked down at Harry, his large hand resting gently on the boy's shoulder. "Don't you listen to them," he said quietly. "You're nothing like they say. You're special, Harry. Your mum and dad were some of the finest witches and wizards I ever knew, and you've got their blood in you. You belong in the wizarding world." Harry swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. No one had ever spoken to him like this before, like he mattered, like he had worth. It was almost too much to take in. Hagrid turned back to the Dursleys, his eyes flashing with anger. "And you lot, if I ever hear you speak ill o' Harry's parents again, you'll regret it." Uncle Vernon opened his mouth as if to protest, but one look at Hagrid's fierce expression made him think better of it. He quickly shut his mouth and cowered back into the corner with Aunt Petunia and Dudley, who had been silently whimpering throughout the entire exchange. Hagrid, satisfied that the Dursleys wouldn't interfere any further, turned back to Harry with a kind smile. "Now then, we best be off. Got a lot to do before term starts at Hogwarts. Gotta get your books, supplies, and of course a wand." "A wand?" Harry repeated, his heart skipping a beat. "Aye, every wizard needs a wand," Hagrid said with a grin. "You'll see. We'll go to Diagon Alley, best place in the world for a young wizard like yourself. But first," Hagrid turned and waved his enormous hand, and with a quick flick, the door that had been blown off its hinges lifted itself back into place with a thud, sealing out the storm once again. Harry stood there for a moment, watching Hagrid in awe. Magic, real magic. It was all true. Everything he had been told tonight, everything he had just learned about himself and his parents, was real. A strange warmth spread through him, pushing away the cold fear and doubt that had gripped him for so long. For the first time in his life, Harry felt a sense of belonging, a sense of hope for the future. Hagrid gave him a friendly pat on the back, nearly knocking him over. "Come on, Harry, let's get going. It's time to start your journey." And with that, Harry followed Hagrid out into the stormy night, leaving behind the only life he had ever known and stepping into a world of magic, wonder, and destiny.